Cross-Tenant Sync has been around for 7 months or so. Just a couple of weeks ago in Message Center, I saw a statement that Cross-Tenant Governance was coming here. And at the time, there was nothing there, right? It was just a link, and it talked about this ability to do exactly what Defender for Cloud Apps cannot do. Detect and identify tenants that are associated with your organization. And the first thing that made me think of was an old pet project video of mine from years ago, the introduction of Defender External Attack Surface Management, right? That looks at your organization from these external collectors, right? Or monitoring systems. Look at what's available to you. So if Defender for Cloud Apps can't tell what tenants are associated with you, now Cross-Tenant Synchronization and Governance can. And literally just today, they've added the ability to create governance policies across those tenants. And there's now a guided private preview option to create new tenants. So let's walk through some of the scenarios that I'm seeing customers explore with this whole idea of cross-tenancy. One, my favorite thing in the whole wide world, man, we are rebuilding Windows into 4.0 in the cloud, baby. We are there. We are building DMZ tenants, right? I've got company A. I've got a resource that's going to be shared across, let's say, multiple subsidiary organizations, or even it's going to be opened up to multiple business partnerships. You know, we're looking at a B2C scenario, but it's a very limited C, very limited C, right? So it's like we are the known supplier for XYZ, right? So you got your corporate data sitting in tenant A, and you create tenant B, and you host the application in tenant B, and you make the application available to both tenants. Then you invite your other tenants into a cross-tenant sync scenario, and as long as every source user and every source tenant is licensed to at least Entra P1, you can actually ingest the identities that you explicitly want and associate them to security principles, groups, applications, whatever, as you choose in tenant B, resource tenant. So we are literally creating user and resource tenants again. I can't wait to take somebody's printer tenant. So that's one thing, right? Actually, the concept of a DMZ tenant is really cool because it allows you to establish not just your security boundaries, but also honor your security principles inside both the source and the destination, right? So again, you don't have to pull all of your users. You don't have to expose all the apps in tenant B. You can be very granular. You can be very organized, right? The next thing, though, and it's sort of a bolt-on to the idea of a DMZ tenant, is let's say you have looked at the cost of doing a SharePoint migration because your company has changed its name. And oh my goodness, while that has been a capability in public for some time, general availability, it still ain't great, man. So we still see, to this day, organizations going through full tenant migrations simply because the name of a SharePoint site needs to change. But what if you could do it differently? What if you could create a new tenant that matches the new public name of your organization, copy in to a SharePoint data migration, essentially, and keep your users in their original tenant? Again, all they need is Entra P1 and change the published URL to the main website on their desktops. There's a lot of flexibility that comes with being willing to accept that your security boundaries can expand beyond the traditional concept of one tenant per organization. We actually see most organizations already have multiple tenants and struggling to figure out how to bring them under control. But with this new ability to discover them, to onboard them, and now to extend governance control, right? So this is still very, very raw. Right now, in this very limited preview, you detect your other tenants that are out there, and you can publish a governance template. It's not a new tenant template yet. I hope that comes. But essentially what it's going to do is allow you to publish tenant A's roles and applications to be accessible to tenant B. So it sort of talks kind of exactly like I'm talking about with this whole idea of user and resource tenants. I really hope this gets expanded. I've seen some really shockingly complex organizational requirements over the last couple of years that I think can be almost one-to-one perfectly addressed by some of these capabilities. And again, going back to the whole concept of cross-cloud, being able to extend tenant A to tenant B, where tenant B is GCC high. Now that does require step-up licensing. It's not E1 at that point for Entra ID governance, but hey, all this talk I've been doing about E7, including Entra ID governance, may be well positioned. And if you think about what that exposes, when we have these cross-tenant, cross-cloud synchronizations, one of the biggest challenges we get into, especially when it goes from commercial to GCC high, is that the team's interoperability is not the best experience. This solution, though, is actually explicitly designed around the team's experience. So if you can create a scenario where users in tenant A, commercial, working with CUI data, that needs to live in GCC high, and you're looking at the cost almost 30% greater per license of moving your entire organization to GCC high. What if instead you took that subset of users and working GCC high workloads, gave them a tenant B, gave them access to it, applications there, created all of your data security, and aligns that to all of your compliance requirements for CMMC, and give them some sort of way to securely access it so there's no data feedback out. Maybe a Windows 365 environment, maybe an AVD, maybe something along those lines. Now, I'm not trying to architect that whole scenario, but the possibilities are actually really compelling, especially when you start looking at what, again, the license costs to do these sort of things. We've actually seen organizations go through commercial to GCC high to back again. And the cost of doing all that to solve for a problem that really covers maybe 10% of the workforce is shocking. So if you haven't looked at it, keep an eye out. Cross-tenant sync, cross-tenant governance, the ability to detect, discover, onboard tenants that may already exist, to send governance requests, and actually also be able to configure an environment specifically to receive or not receive governance requests. So the lot that's there, still very much preview capabilities. But I am really excited about this idea of rebuilding Windows NT4 in the cloud. I jest, but everything old is new again.